premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Horrible, horrible symptoms including heightened depression, anxiety, heart palpitations, insomnia, an inability to concentrate, binge eating, and dissociation, all while feeling incredibly overwhelmed and exhausted. Really bad PMS. PMDD, but I honestly did not know what there was to do about it besides to give myself a shit ton of rest and basically fall off the face of the earth for a few days. But everything changed. Hello, and welcome back to the Live Label Free podcast. I'm your host, Livia Sara, an autistic eating disorder survivor turned mental health coach. I'm also the author of 3 books, my cookbook, Nourishing Neurodiversity, my memoir, Rainbow Girl, and my newest book, How to Beat Extreme Hunger, has just been released. In fact, everything we are going to be talking about today is based upon pages upon pages upon pages of research included in my Extreme Hunger book, because PMDD, which stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder, was something I didn't experience or even know about until after I went through Extreme Hunger and was weight restored. You can grab either the audiobook, ebook, or paperback of How to Beat Extreme Hunger now at livelabelfree.com/Extreme Hunger Book. And now let's dive into today's episode all about autism, ADHD, and PMDD. Raise your hand if you've heard of PMS before. Premenstrual syndrome, or the shitty period before your period, is a common yet misunderstood experience in people who get periods. Thanks to my eating disorder, I didn't get my first period until I was 18 years old, which, as I describe in my book, I had really mixed feelings about. One of the reasons I missed my eating disorder was because I didn't have to deal with the intense hormone and mood fluctuations that come with having a female physiology. But at the same time, I knew it was something I had to accept. The fact that my body was working even after all the trauma I had put it through was truly a miracle. Experiencing extreme hunger was a miracle too, but at the time, it sure as hell didn't feel like it. So if you've read my memoir, Rainbow Girl, you know I finally committed to full recovery in July of 2017. I had been struggling with an eating disorder since I was around 11 years old, and I was seriously at a point where I could just not keep on barely surviving. So I ate more. I rested, and I gained a lot of weight super fast. I was deemed, quote-unquote, weight restored in October of 2017, and then I got my first period ever in July of 2018. Now, this period after getting my period was a time in which I felt incredibly ambivalent about my forward path. Up until this day, I had used not having a period as my reason to eat more and rest. I had used not having a period as my permission slip to take all the recovery actions we're told to take when we have an eating disorder. So then when I eventually did get my period, I felt this incredible identity crisis. I thought I was now perfectly healthy, so I no longer needed to rest or needed the amount of food I had been eating. And so slowly, the eating disorder creeped back in, and I would say I was definitely in a state of quasi-recovery, or however you want to pronounce that. I was eating healthy and exercising and doing all the things that a quote-unquote healthy person does, but there were still subtle ways in which I was not giving myself the full permission I knew in my heart I needed to give myself if I was to live a life of freedom. Well, thankfully, although I didn't see it as thankfully at the time, my body was keeping tabs on things, because that is what is so incredible about our body, is that it's always keeping a little record of your intake and your energy expenditure and your sleep and everything else it needs to optimize your survival. Why does it do this? so that it can help you bounce back and return to its desired state of homeostasis if you've been deprived. So lo and behold, in October of 2018, about 3 months after I got my first period, and about 3 months after I started restricting again, I was hit by the extreme hunger bomb. Now, whereas I knew extreme hunger was a normal and even healthy experience in recovery from a restrictive eating disorder, I believed my extreme hunger wasn't valid. I believed my extreme hunger was quote-unquote wrong because I was already quote-unquote weight restored, and heck, I even had a period. And if this is you, you're definitely going to want to grab a copy of my book, How to Beat Extreme Hunger, because I explain precisely why extreme hunger usually does happen when you are deemed already weight restored. So anyways, I gained a ton more weight and even went into weight overshoot. And if you have no clue what I'm talking about, be sure to check out this video right here that I did on the importance about weight overshoot in eating disorder recovery. Now, this was probably the hardest part of the entire recovery process because I felt like I had done recovery wrong, and there was no going back at this point because no matter how hard I tried, I literally could not restrict without it being met by a more intense period of feast eating. Now, after yo-yoing more times than I care to admit, I realized there really was no more fighting my biology. I could either surrender to my body's needs and choose to make peace with all that accompanied that, or I could keep fighting a fight that couldn't be won. Well, it's obvious which choice I made, but that doesn't mean the struggle was over. In fact, when my weight finally nestled within its set point weight range and my period started to normalize, a whole new struggle reared its head. I didn't know it at the time, but this struggle, as I would learn much later, is called PMDD, which is short for premenstrual dysphoric disorder. In the week leading up to my period, I would experience horrible symptoms including heightened depression, anxiety, heart palpitations, insomnia, an inability to concentrate, binge eating, and dissociation, all while feeling incredibly overwhelmed and exhausted. Because all of these symptoms coincided with my luteal phase, which is the phase of the menstrual cycle right before you start bleeding, and in a moment I will explain the 4 different phases in depth, I chalked it all down to really bad PMS. Every month was riddled with fear and resistance towards that one inevitable week before my period, but I honestly did not know what there was to do about it besides to give myself a shit ton of rest and basically fall off the face of the earth for a few days. But everything changed when I was scrolling Instagram one day to be met with a post by a dear friend titled Autism and PMDD. I'm always intrigued by new terminology surrounding autism, so of course I wanted to learn more. What you're about to hear is a part of the chapter titled Puberty, Periods, and PMDD from my audiobook recording of How to Beat Extreme Hunger. I am so delighted and honored to be able to share this fascinating research and insight with you today. Before diving into the nitty-gritty of what PMDD is and how it's diagnosed, it's helpful to briefly outline the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. Follicular phase, which typically lasts 7 to 10 days. The hypothalamus produces gonadotropin-releasing hormone, GnRH, which stimulates the pituitary gland to produce and release follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, and luteinizing hormone, LH. FSH and LH travel through the bloodstream to the ovaries, where they stimulate the growth and maturation of follicles, which are sacs that contain eggs. As the follicles mature, they begin to produce estrogen, a hormone that plays a key role in regulating the menstrual cycle. Ovulatory phase, which typically lasts 3 to 4 days. The increased estrogen levels trigger a sharp rise in luteinizing hormone from the pituitary gland, causing the release of a mature egg from a dominant follicle, which is known as ovulation. Luteal phase, which typically lasts 10 to 14 days. After ovulation, the remaining follicle cells form the corpus luteum. Along with estrogen, the corpus luteum produces progesterone, a hormone that prepares the uterus for possible pregnancy. And the menstrual phase, which typically lasts 3 to 7 days. If pregnancy does not occur, the corpus luteum degenerates and estrogen and progesterone levels drop. This drop in hormone levels causes the uterine lining to shed, resulting in menstruation. Now that you have a basic overview of the menstrual cycle, time to dive into PMDD. So first of all, what is PMDD? PMDD stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder and is considered to be a much more severe form of premenstrual syndrome. Individuals with PMDD may experience a wide range of symptoms during the luteal phase of their cycle. These symptoms are similar to the aforementioned mood swings, fatigue, difficulty sleeping, changes in appetite, and digestive issues commonly seen in PMS, but, you guessed it, are much more extreme. In fact, unlike PMS, PMDD is an official disorder in the DSM-5 categorized under depressive disorders. To meet the criteria for PMDD, you must experience a total of 5 specific symptoms, at least one of which must be from the following group: feeling very irritable or angry, feeling very down or depressed, feeling very anxious, stressed, or tense, and avoiding your usual activities. Any one or more of the following additional symptoms must be present for a combined total of 5 symptoms to confirm PMDD. Difficulty concentrating, feeling tired and very low in energy level, binge eating or having really strong specific food cravings, sleeping too much or having trouble falling asleep, feeling overwhelmed or out of control, and unpleasant physical symptoms, especially breast tenderness, bloating, body aches, and weight gain. In order to be diagnosed with PMDD, symptoms must be present only in the week or 2 before your period, and they must subside within a few days of starting your period as quickly as they come on. This is a critical note, as the listed symptoms are also seen in other circumstances, such as when coming out of energy deficit and in other mood disorders. During my own luteal phase, there are always a few days where I seem to completely blank out. It can be quite scary, as the numbness can overtake me from one moment to the next, rendering me incapable of engaging in activities I usually love doing. Furthermore, PMDD can cause incredible exhaustion to the point where all I want to do is sleep. And I'm not the only one. One of my clients told me that she sleeps a whopping 18 hours each night for 2 to 3 days during her luteal phase each month. I have a really close relationship with my mom, and I remember calling her once in tears, saying it feels like I have bipolar. Although I hesitate to share that sentence because my very last intention is to minimize the experience of people who actually have bipolar disorder, just like how people without obsessive-compulsive disorder minimize the disorder by saying, "I'm so OCD," to describe their desire for order. I choose to share it with this acknowledgement because I know I'm not alone. In the days leading up to my period now, feelings of euphoria can turn into depression in the blink of an eye. Not only that, but the preceding week is often filled with insatiable hunger that tends to shut off as soon as I start to bleed. The toughest part of it all, though, is the not feeling like myself. And I don't just mean feeling off or the temporary disconnectedness we all have sometimes. When I'm about to get my period, it resembles total dissociation. It's hard to describe precisely, as I don't exactly feel present in those moments, but my best attempt at explaining the experience is this. I am aware of my body and know that I'm alive on Earth, but my brain feels like a cloud that is incapable of thinking creatively. Hey there, I really hope you're enjoying this episode. If anything you're hearing is resonating with you and you're learning from it, can you take a minute to rate and review the Live Label Free podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts? It's a super quick and completely free way to support the show and helps me to bring you more free value each week. I really appreciate your love and your time and your energy, and now let's get back to today's episode. The exact causes of PMDD are unknown, and there is unfortunately quite a lack of research on the subject. However, there are various explanations for why someone may experience PMDD, including genetics, trauma, and hormonal and sensory sensitivities. Genetics. Based on family studies, twin studies, and genetic studies, PMDD is thought to have a heritability range of 30 to 80%. Researchers have found associated variations of specific estrogen and serotonin receptor genes in individuals with PMDD compared to control subjects. These findings establish a biological basis for PMDD, validating the experience of PMDD warriors and therefore paving the path to appropriate management of the disorder. Trauma. Significant stress and trauma exposure have been associated with PMDD. There are several explanations for this risk factor in and of itself, one being the tightly linked HPG and HPA axes. Furthermore, patients with a genetic predisposition for PMDD may be more vulnerable to develop PTSD in the first place due to a heightened trauma response. Sensitivities. While I researched PMDD, the topic of hormonal and sensory sensitivities naturally intrigued me due to the associations with neurodiversity. In fact, the presence of a neurodivergent brain could rule out the need to search for different causes of PMDD altogether, considering neurodivergence is genetic and neurodivergent people are more likely to experience trauma. Furthermore, it is well established that neurodivergent individuals process sensory stimuli differently, including hormonal stimuli. That being said, let's give neurodiversity the spotlight it deserves and delve into just why neurodivergent individuals are more likely to experience PMDD. Among the population of individuals who menstruate, current estimates show a 20 to 40% prevalence of PMS, while 2 to 8% experience PMDD. When it comes to statistics, many people without access to healthcare are not included. Therefore, it's important to take these numbers with a large grain of salt and use them to get a general idea of the true statistics. The reason I choose to share these numbers here is because of their strong clash with the data found in the neurodivergent population. With the ongoing stigmas surrounding neurodiversity and the massive underrecognition, invalidation, and misdiagnosis of mental health conditions, it's safe to say reliable studies on neurodiversity are few and far between. However, results from the studies that have been conducted show significant elevation of PMDD occurrence among the autistic and ADHD population. One study from 2008 compared 26 women diagnosed with autism with 36 neurotypical control women. The results were quite astounding. 92% of the autistic women met the diagnostic criteria for PMDD compared to a mere 11% in the control group. Another 2021 study assessing the prevalence of PMDD in those with ADHD recruited 209 ADHD women and 1,405 neurotypical controls to complete questionnaires measuring PMDD symptoms. The results indicated a 46% prevalence of PMDD in the ADHDers as compared to a 28% prevalence in the control group. The wide 11 to 28% range of PMDD found in neurotypicals begs the question of how reliable the observed 92% and 46% prevalences of PMDD in autistic and ADHD people truly are, not to mention the fact that both studies did not include AFAB individuals who do not necessarily identify as women. Yet one conclusion can be drawn. Autistic and ADHD people are much more likely to have PMDD. But why? As previously established, genetics are a proven factor for both neurodivergence and PMDD. This led me to wonder whether the genes involved in PMDD are associated with autism and/or ADHD. While the genetic research on PMDD and neurodiversity, separately and together, is relatively new, emerging studies have confirmed alterations in the expression of estrogen and serotonin receptor genes, the same genes that have been associated with PMDD, in autistic individuals. Although the research on estrogen receptor genes in ADHD is limited, there seems to be a correlation between serotonin receptor genes and ADHD. Speaking of which, ADHD is often associated with the neurotransmitter dopamine. However, just like in autism, research has shown serotonin also plays a significant role. An abundance of science shows that autistic individuals have altered levels of serotonin and dopamine in the brain. Whereas this fact is generally accepted within the autistic space, less is known about the role of serotonin in ADHD. Studies from animal models of ADHD indicate an intimate interplay between serotonergic and dopaminergic neurotransmission, meaning the root causes of ADHD may lie deeper than the common belief that someone with ADHD simply lacks dopamine. Because any type of neurodivergence, beyond just autism and ADHD, is genetic and expresses itself differently in each individual, it goes without saying that physiological underpinnings are infinitely variable. This genetic variance explains why not everyone who is neurodivergent has PMDD, develops an eating disorder, or becomes a victim of abuse. Overlapping scientific findings teach us a lot, but as I mentioned in my philosophical spiel in the Evolutionary Adaptations to Famine section, research can only be conducted based off what we already know. And as Aristotle famously wrote, the more you know you don't know. While there's a lot we don't know, new research is thankfully emerging every day. One study found that individuals with PMDD have an alteration in a specific gene complex that regulates cellular response to estrogen and progesterone. In simple terms, there is genetic evidence for why people with PMDD have an increased sensitivity to their reproductive hormones during the luteal phase. When paired with knowledge of neurodiversity, this is a revolutionary finding. As you learned, hormones are closely tied to neurotransmitters. This means that divergent reactions to reproductive hormones are directly linked to variations in brain chemicals and neurologic pathways that control your mood and support a sense of well-being. Because autistic and ADHD individuals already have unique levels of these neurotransmitters, we may be more sensitive to hormone fluctuations and thus the symptoms they bring about. While I could obviously go on for hours about this topic and continue to share my experience and how I cope with PMDD, This episode is long enough, and besides, I dive even deeper into this topic in my book, How to Beat Extreme Hunger, which is now officially published. So if anything I said today resonates with you and you'd like to learn more, be sure to grab your copy of either the audiobook, ebook, or paperback at livelabelfree.com/extreme hunger book. I am so freaking excited for you to read it and, of course, to speak to you in the next episode. Bye-bye for now.